to dig back into this, let me actually now hit you with one of the things that really set us off on doing this, is that as I had gone through all of these jihadist websites and read a lot of the ideological works, there's a very consistent stress on media, on the importance of media. And this quote simply illustrates that in the material you're going to see, and the material we cover in the report, shows that this is a very solid commitment. It's not just words, they really follow through. That for them, media is half the battle. The report covers Sunni insurgent groups, so we're not looking at Shiite media, we're not looking at the official Iraqi media. It's simply the products produced by the Sunni insurgent groups and their supporters, which is a global category. Now, as I said, you get this full array of media products, from the political statements, press releases, to full-length feature films. In the report, we do detail on. Yes?
Can I just one question? The funding. Did you look at the funding of all this?
We didn't look specifically at the funding, but let me just let the cat out of the bag right away that it's not terribly expensive, because when we look at how this is structured, it's small groups, a lot of them working for volunteer, on a volunteer basis, and the stuff they use is all off the shelf. You know, everything you need to make a jihadist movie or magazine is basically bundled with the Windows operating system in your laptop. Okay, so it's a little bit of a misnomer to think that these people are, you know, somewhere operating a big, sophisticated media operation. It's not that difficult to produce. The results are sophisticated, but it's pretty cost-effective. You know, partly because there's no bureaucracy. You know, and I'll get to that toward the end when I talk about production. We go through the various categories of production, looking at text and then video. In text, the basic unit of production is simply a press release like any other organization would put out. This is announcing the killing of someone in a Shiite militia in Baghdad. It's by the Islamic Army in Iraq. What's striking, though, is the number of press releases. I went through 2 forums, 1 month, and found almost 1,000 statements. Now, if I dug a little bit deeper, I'm sure I would have come up with more than 1,000. Some of these are press releases. Some of these are announcements of films. Some of them are political statements. But all in all, you get 20 to 30 statements a day. If you were to go online right now and look at some of these distribution forums, what you'd see are statements appearing literally every few minutes. When these statements are released, they make a very big effort to format them as authoritatively as possible. So you see here on the left a Pentagon press release, and on the right an Al-Qaeda in Iraq press release. And this speaks to one of the deeper messages they're sending, which is that we're not a group of ragtag insurgents. We're a serious military force that's confronting and defeating the U.S. And the formatting of the press release speaks to that message, because they really want to convey that we're on the same level. When you go through the actual material of the press releases, it does tell you some interesting things. We can't verify most of the claims, and to be honest, I'm sure they're extremely exaggerated. But it's the media picture they want to present, so it's interesting in its own right as what they want the world to see about them. So going through those 1,000 press releases and picking out only those attacks where it's evident from the headline. So if you're scrolling through in your browser, you're going to think that this is what they're doing. The largest number of attacks they claim are against U.S. forces. The second largest, the brown bar here, is against Iraqi government forces, which is National Guard and police. Third largest was against Shiite militias, that's the white bar. But if you add up those latter 2 categories, they're both fellow Iraqis. So what you find is that in their own claims of attacks, the insurgent groups, Sunni insurgent groups, are entirely unabashed about being involved in a civil conflict. Okay? They claim in total more attacks against fellow Iraqis than against U.S. troops. And bear in mind that the high-profile attacks against civilians that generally make the press here, those are usually orphans in the media environment. You don't get press releases saying we killed 100 people at market, for the most part. As I said, when these materials come out, they make a real effort to produce attractive, sophisticated materials. On the left, you see an overview of 2 weeks of operations broken down by the target, the type of attack, the damage inflicted, casualties. On the right, you see a similar overview presented graphically with planes representing locations where they claim to have downed planes, territory shaded out they claim to control fully, different color for territory they claim to control partially. Once again, this speaks to that message that we're a professional and competent and authoritative operation. When you read the press releases, at first you need a key to decode them, because they never talk about U.S. forces or Iraqi police, the Crusaders, apostates, idolatrous guards. Some of these are puns in Arabic. the point is that the impression you get is not of a national liberation struggle. It's not we're going to liberate Iraq from the occupiers. It's really of a jihadist conflict. And even the groups that we know are more nationalist in outlook have adopted this jihadist rhetoric wholesale, at least for the press releases. In their political statements, you will find differences. Okay? And it's important to note that when, say, a nationalist group releases a political statement, if they use the word occupier, that's a political marker. They are setting themselves apart from the jihadists with the use of that term. So it is important to look at some of the rhetorical details. But for the most part, in the press releases online, what you find is this very jihadist rhetoric. Moving to the next level of media production, there are magazines. Some of these are purely focused on Iraq. Some of them are global jihadist magazines with sections on Iraq. They're published online in PDF and document format, but if you print them out on nice paper and color, it's a decently formatted magazine. I have to say I gained an enormous amount of respect for their production abilities as we went through and produced this report. The fact that they're putting this together by themselves in internet cafes every 2 months is incredible. I really have to say that. Now I can speak with some knowledge of the
Where are the
process.
magazine production facilities? You need printing presses?
No, because you just put it online. What you're doing is you're putting, when you produce one of these, the first thing you get for the blue line is a PDF.
Yeah.
And that's what they produce, and then you can go and print it if you want. And where is it produced? It's really produced in, when we get to production, I'll show that it can be produced in 10 different locations. There's no centralized brick and mortar infrastructure, which is one of the really key aspects of this whole media production.
I'll tell you, I don't want to interrupt
Yeah.
the flow because you're on a roll here, but the folks do we know the folks in the main who are doing this, are they doing this with homegrown skill and knowledge because they just figured it out and that's the state of play in Baghdad and elsewhere? Or are they getting assistance from outside on the technical and production
I think it's
side?
mainly homegrown. I think it's mainly homegrown. You're occasionally going to get people, the jihadist movement in particular has a very strong component of people with technical backgrounds, engineers, doctors, etc. So they're going to have some kind of technical background, but for the most part, it's off the shelf. And I taught myself to subtitle films and do video editing in the course of putting this presentation together. So it's not that difficult to learn. Okay. So these are the magazines. This is a little bit behind in terms of dates, but there are a considerable number of these magazines that have come out. So you have 12 issues, 30, 40 issues. In the bottom right corner, this is actually a very interesting publication. It's biographies of martyrs. And about two and a half years ago, I did an article for the New Republic analyzing martyr biographies. And actually, there's a comparison in the report where, at that time, what we found were, if you look on page 18, we found a document people had put together by pulling things off of Arab newspapers, from chat rooms, from forums, and they simply collected 430 biographies, put them into a Word file, and put it online. Didn't look very professional, and most importantly, there's no message control because they're taking the materials from elsewhere. Now, in 2007, there's a periodical that comes out every 2 weeks. It's called Biographies of Notable Martyrs. There's much more detail. So on page 18 in the top, there's a guy, I put a box around it, one-line biography 2 years ago. Now, he's got 2 pages, it's nicely formatted, and most importantly, I would stress, someone is exerting message control, okay? And they're doing interviews with the family members, they provide a lot of background information, the person is presented as a paragon of Islamic virtue. So you see the sort of increasing professionalization and message control in the development of this one genre over the last 2 to 3 years. And that's only one sort of minor nook and cranny of this media effort. Here's, by the way, what one of the magazines looks like when you spread it out. This is the December issue of the Forsan. You get 6 pages of charts and graphs on the military operations, an article on how the Afghan Mujahideen are adopting tactical innovations from Iraq and adapting them to Afghanistan. There's a short story, there's poetry, there's political commentary about the Jewish-Kurdish conspiracy. I think there's a letter from the readers, and there's an address where you can send in some comments. And this comes out about every 2 months. Okay, this is the December issue. And you see, if you print this out, it looks okay. It's not quite as professionally produced as the report, but it's pretty impressive. They're also full-length books. The books tend to be written not by people in Iraq, but by sympathizers from the global jihadist movement, primarily in the Persian Gulf. They set the bar for book pretty low, so anything 50 pages and above is usually categorized as a book. Some of them are very interesting. In the lower left corner with the green fluorescent cover, it's a 221-page study of jihadist media in Iraq. It's very sympathetic. It looks at the Islamic legal justifications for media work, tips on how to conduct it more effectively, the role media plays in the jihad. So there's a lot of attention and analysis going into the media effort. Most of the books, though, are about larger strategic questions, the role of Iraq in the global jihad. As I said, maybe there's 50 to 100 books. They're available online for downloading, and this is more the detailed ideological background. So moving from text to video, I call press releases the building block of the text side. The building block on the video side is an attack video. Now, these are all very standardized. There are hundreds of them. We've all seen them on the news. They follow a very standard format. They're branded. There's always a logo in the corner. You're going to get a little caption telling you what's happening and where, and it will show one short military operation. Here's what they look like. As I said, every group produces these. There are hundreds of them all over the web. They come out every single day. A lot of times press releases will come out with a link to a video record of the operation. These break down into a couple of fairly distinct genres. You have bombings, sniper attacks, mortar attacks, and then primarily Al-Qaeda in Iraq will release videos of suicide bombings. And here you get an insight into an act of violence that's really being staged as a media event. So for example, this is a 3-minute clip. I'm going to play a little excerpt from it. This is a car here being driven by a suicide bomber. This video is going to show you the car blowing up, and you're going to get a voiceover. The voiceover is explaining the explosives they used, how effectively the operation was carried out, how much damage they did, where it was carried out. It's done in a sort of newscaster style, standard Arabic. And then the camera pulls back and you get the same operation from a different camera angle. And in a 3-minute video, there are 3 camera angles. So there was one person behind the wheel of the car and 3 camera crews set up. So this is an operation that was primarily planned as a media event. It was done so that this film could be produced. Okay? In a sense, the military part is almost incidental. The important part is to get the footage. There are also longer films ranging from 10 minutes to an hour, and they also break down into very defined genres. So for example, this is a half-hour overview of a single operation. You get the planning, the execution, a little after-action report. This is an hour-long biographical documentary of a former Al-Qaeda in Iraq military commander. This is a top 20 compilation by Ansar Sunnah, which is another insurgent group. It's set up as a competition between brigades within a single insurgent group to see who can pull off the most visually effective attack against U.S. forces. It's presented as to encourage a spirit of healthy competition among the insurgents, and they challenge other groups to produce more effective and more visually engaging videos and compilations. The most popular genre at this point, though, is really about the enemy. In the past, these were primarily films about the Americans. A lot of footage of U.S. soldiers kicking down doors, humiliating Iraqis. There's a general consensus now among the insurgent groups that the U.S. is on the way out. And this is inspired largely by the domestic political debate here, so people are looking, and the insurgent groups are primarily looking at the internal enemy. For the Sunni groups, this is the Shiites. So you have lots and lots of films about the dastardly plans of the Shiites, the impending Shia genocide against Sunnis, and let me give you an example of what this propaganda looks like. Now, this is an excerpt from a film by a Sunni insurgent group, and what they've done is they've taken a speech by a radical Shiite preacher and assistant to Muqtada Sadr. And in this speech, he's basically saying the only good Sunni is a dead Sunni. They've juxtaposed this with footage of Sunnis killed by Shiite death squads, and I've subtitled the speech, so here's what it looks like. what the subtitle is saying is that these are the crimes his followers are carrying out in response to this address. Now, this excerpt was packaged for mobile phones and was sent back and forth both in Iraq and in the Gulf, and it was on the web.
When was this done?
This is a fairly old film. This I don't know when this speech took place. The film I took this from came out maybe 6 months ago. Okay, I think it's a bit earlier. He was appointed, I think, the head of a mosque or a grave in Baghdad. We could go back and check the date, but the film was actually not presented with any date. It was sort of, this is what the Shiites are planning, and it was a fairly popular thing to send back and forth on mobile phones, and it's a very effectively structured bit of propaganda. You get this incendiary address, you have the footage of the bodies of these Sunnis, so this is really one of the most popular genres right now. Now, the other big video and audio genre are major political statements. So when an insurgent group releases a major political statement, it's going to be packaged either as an audio or a video address. And you get here on the right what the announcement would look like. This is an address at the beginning of the surge called The Failure of the Maliki-Bush Plan. And then here, this is a still from a video address from October 2006. But it's nice because you get all of the elements. So you have the logo of the insurgent group on the wall. That's the Mujahideen Shura Council. You get the Caliphate Voice Channel, which is an online TV channel. You get their logo up here. You have English subtitles. And you even have a computer-generated mock-up of the newsroom down to the coffee cup on the desk. So you have sort of all of the visual elements of propaganda there. When films are released, there's a full PR and advertising campaign, so you get banner advertisements all over the web. And some of these advertise films that are already out, others advertise films that will soon be released. When you click on one of these banners, it brings you to a long list of download sites, and you get 4 choices of format. You can download it in high quality, which is a very large file, medium quality, low quality, and then compressed for mobile phone. So you usually get, 100. These usually work for about a month, and they tend to go dead. So bear in mind that, if you can download it, you can then burn it onto CD. So this serves also as a distribution for actual physical production in those places where people are not going to have good enough internet connections to download films. Because people have asked, are these films for sale? And what I've said is that, anywhere that you have the internet, you can create a production facility because the files are available everywhere. When you watch the films, there's always a soundtrack of songs. And one of the things I would stress is that it's not simply a soundtrack. These are primarily designed for an Arabic-speaking audience. And the songs carry a very potent ideological message. And there's a very interesting thing that happens. When Iraqi groups release films about things in Iraq with attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq, the soundtrack is almost always not about Iraq, but about sort of the international jihad. And there's a good technical reason for this. When you're producing one of these films and you go looking for a soundtrack, the jihadist songs are available in MP3 format all over the web. We went looking for Iraqi nationalist songs, and they're available, but they're hard to find, and they're not very good quality. So for the most part, all the groups tend to send a jihadist message with the songs. And just to give you a sense of what that's actually like, I've translated one of the more popular songs, and we'll run through that then. Now, what you notice about this is that Iraq is never even mentioned in this particular song, which is fairly typical for the international jihadist repertoire, which was mainly recorded actually before 2003. But the point is that these are the songs that are most readily available. They tend to provide the backdrop, and they also tend to provide the sort of ideological context. The songs are sung in standard Arabic, very clearly enunciated words, intelligible to a mass audience. So it's an important component of films. And just as a personal plug, I don't think they're dirge-like. They're actually fairly rousing and motivational. I've read too many accounts where they describe it as dirge-like. There's no musical accompaniment, but they're actually pretty exciting. Okay, how is this stuff made? Well, when you start actually breaking it down, it's pretty simple to make a movie. All the things you need are already available. You have the songs online, you have statements by the insurgent groups, you have footage that you can take from YouTube, Al Jazeera, CNN, you can take the attack clips from a website, you can take a logo, and then you make a movie. And this is simply a concrete example of a film that came out 2 months ago, where all these elements are present. So I've just given you the sort of sources for this. This film is interesting because they took footage of insurgents and they spliced it in with footage of U.S. troops that was shot by the U.S. military. So you have these guys on patrol, and it came either from YouTube or a documentary, and they're driving through Iraq, and then you'll shift to the insurgents who are crouching at the roadside. And then you shift to the U.S. troops, and then the insurgents go, Allahu Akbar, and they fire, and the U.S. troops go, oh shit, we're under attack, because they have footage of patrol that actually came under attack. Separate incidents, but it's spliced together so that it produces a cinematic effect of a single incident. The point is that you can do this with Windows Movie Maker in the background. It's really not difficult to do. All you need are these various component parts, which are available on the internet. So what that means is that production is relatively simple, and someone was asking, where is this produced? Well, it can be produced in 5 different locations. You know, one person can add the logos, and then you can transfer the file, and someone else can do some of the editing, you can add fade. It's really, you don't need to have 5 people sitting in one place. So it's spread out, which means that the question of who produces it is very difficult to answer, which is why we did the Venn diagram here. What you get so much of is not producers, but branding mechanisms. So a film will come out, and it will carry the insignia or logo of an insurgent group, or maybe a global jihadist production unit, or it will maybe come from an individual. And to give you an example of how this is all interwoven, in the bottom right you see this green webpage. That's the webpage of Hamid Ali. He's based in Kuwait. He's a cleric who writes a lot about the insurgency. He's fairly pro-Al-Qaeda, not 100%. On February 19th, Al Jazeera interviewed a woman called Sabrina al-Jannabi, and she said she was Sunni and was raped by 4 Shiite policemen. This created a huge stir in the Arab world. It was an enormous story in Iraq. The interview happened on February 19th. By February 21st, Hamid Ali had put a poem on his website about this incident. It may have been February 20th. That poem flew all over the forums. It was being quoted in statements. Insurgent groups named operations after Sabrina al-Jannabi, called Vengeance for Our Dishonored Women, and they would use quotes from his poem, and then this would go into films. So you see that all of these elements play into each other. They can all be picked up and used. Who produces it? It really could be any one of these groups. They could even be interacting, and it's impossible to identify from the final product. You know, unless you're going to get some sort of digital signature, unless you're in the NSA. But from the perspective of a person who's looking at this on the web, we don't know. Now, how does this stuff reach the world? This is actually not as complicated as it appears. In the lower left, you have the web pages of the actual insurgent groups. Okay, most of these groups have web pages. They put their statements there. They put their movies there. There are 2 television channels up here on the right. One is online. One is on satellite TV. But the major distribution point are forums. So you have 20, 30, 40 forums where every single day there are statements coming out. Every day there are movies coming out. Every single day there are new publications coming out. Now, who goes to these forums? I think you have 3 very clearly defined groups. Some people are just curious. That's how I went there. You know, Al-Qaeda in Iraq has a website. I wonder what it looks like. Another group, they're supporters. People who are very excited about the insurgency, people who are very supportive of Al-Qaeda. They want to see every new press release. They want to watch every new movie. They want to read every new magazine. The third and most important group are the people who produce the mainstream Arab media. Now, in the old days, when the Palestine Liberation Front hijacked a plane, you could sit in the office and listen to a fax. That doesn't happen anymore. You have to go to their website where they've posted their statement. And if you're the second person at the website, you don't get a scoop. So you have to really be on these sites all the time. And the mainstream media, it's their job. So they are on these sites all the time. They're always looking at these statements. They're always looking at the videos. Al Jazeera covers it pretty heavily. But that's really how this reaches a larger audience, through coverage in the mainstream media. Now, the main Arab news stations will also interview insurgents directly. So that's the direct link. But that's how it sort of makes it out to the world. And to give you a concrete example, in April, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the Islamic State of Iraq, announced a cabinet of ministers. They sort of formed a government, and here are ministers of war. They even announced a minister of fisheries. When this was posted, it was posted on their website. But it was posted immediately to a forum. I underlined it here in green. And you can see, by the way, when statements come out on the forums, they come branded with a logo. So you immediately know when you look at it whose press release this is. About 2 hours later, it went to the webpage of Al Hayat, which is one of the major Saudi-funded Arab dailies. And then, of course, it was covered by Al Jazeera that whole day. This is what the statement looks like. So what happens is something jumps from a niche website to the biggest mainstream media in the Arab world in a matter of hours. And just to give you a sense of the reach of the various internet sites, this is just sort of a thumbnail sketch with Alexa. But you can see it jumped from a website with very tiny reach. This is the Al-Qaeda in Iraq website, the forum, to a much larger website, to what is probably the largest news website in the Arab world. That's incredible bang for the buck in terms of publicity, access to media. Not every press release gets this treatment, of course, but the major statements do get this sort of treatment. And that's why this internet model actually is quite effective for moving things to the mainstream media. We call this the amplification effect in the report. Let me just give you another example of it. Most of the insurgent groups claim they killed between 25,000 and 35,000 U.S. soldiers. This speaks to this larger theme of we're confronting and defeating the U.S. Now, this is, these are instructions. If you add this line of code to your webpage, you're going to get a running tally of casualties based on what the insurgents say. So on the day that I looked at this in April, it said 35,000 U.S. soldiers killed total, 2 killed today. You're only going to reach thousands through a web page. Where you really reach millions is when you get on television. And in April, Al Jazeera did an hour-long interview with the spokesman for the Islamic Army in Iraq. And it's sort of a nice screenshot here because you see they blurred out his face, but you get the website of the group. So you can then go to the website and get the statements and videos. But in the course of an hour-long interview, and this is a show that can get up to 30 million viewers, by the way, in the course of this hour-long interview, they played 2 long excerpts from one of the most popular films by the Islamic Army in Iraq. And I'll just show you what it looked like in the context of the Al Jazeera programming. So 2 things I would know. Number 1, there's no distancing going on here at all. They're showing the video in its original context with the Islamic Army in Iraq logo, with the soundtrack where the song is saying, shoot, shoot, sniper at Baghdad, tear them limb from limb. So Al Jazeera's not distancing themselves at all. It's a 3-minute excerpt. Number 2, it's sort of embedded in the context of Al Jazeera. So you have the Islamic Army logo in the upper left, the Al Jazeera logo in the lower right, and the Al Jazeera news crawl. So it's interesting in that context. They also used this video for all the promos for this particular interview. So for the Islamic Army in Iraq, I mean, you can't ask for a better platform than this. This is really impressive access to mainstream media. This doesn't happen every single day, but when it does, the effect is really striking. Almost everything I've showed you thus far, this is really sort of the global message. This is going out primarily to the Arabic-speaking world, tangentially to Iraq, but primarily to the Arabic-speaking world that's going to view mainstream media. We have Radio Free Iraq, and we asked our correspondents on the ground in Iraq, well, what sort of things are going on in Iraq? Are people interested in this media? How do they get it? And they said, well, to be honest, most people in Iraq have other concerns. And the primary way that these groups communicate with the Iraqi population is through leaflets. And they sent us about 40 or 50 leaflets, and we went through, and you can just see, on the left are the sort of professionally formatted global materials distributed via the internet, and on the right are the leaflets that were sent to us from Iraq. And, they're sort of poorly mimeographed, badly copied, and the content is different. So on the right is a leaflet that says a final warning to sheep smugglers in Mosul, that you are driving up prices in the region for locals. Another one on the left says that if you have received a threat by telephone from Ansar Sunnah, please write to the email address here, ansarsunnahmosul@yahoo.com, and let us know, and we'll take care of it, because we do not issue threats by phone in the Mosul region, and we will get to the bottom of this situation. So the tone is a little different. You don't find these materials on the internet. They're not really appropriate for the image that these groups want to project globally, but they are communication with the local population. So what we want to stress in the report is that there's a difference between the global and the local messages. That's the overview. I mean, there's much more detail in here, but that's the quick overview of my